What's up, guys? Today we're going to be going over Strand Titan in Season 24 and the final shape, and I believe Strand Titan is still absolutely S tier in this game. I'm going to be comparing the Synthoceps to the new exotic, the Wishful Ignorance, and seeing which one is better, seeing how good these new gauntlets are. Is it still just use Syntho all the time, or is there a place for these in the game? So starting off with Synthoceps, again, damage on Carl, base melee. With Banner War, it's still going to be a 1.4x melee increase, and then with the Synthos by themselves, there'll be a 2.65, same as on Hunter with the Exotic Cloak. But the thing about these two buffs now is that once you combine them, Banner of War will decrease to a 1.15 instead of being the full 1.4, taking the total increase to just over 3x. And of course, we can also add in 1-2 Punch and a debuff such as Tractor Cannon, a 1.3 and a 2x from 1-2 Punch, taking the total to 7.92, increase over our base melee damage. And look at that increase on top of the Frenzied Blades, so take the damage of Frenzied Blade to 217,000. You also get a huge increase for grapple melee. You're going to get all the same buffs as before, and that will take it up to 206 times 2, a total of 412,000, while we mentioned the Frenzy Blade is 217.5. So pretty good damage off the bat. Not as good as Hunter, but comparing stuff to Prismatic Hunter is kind of not fair right now. And the thing about Synthoceps is it's also in the right column for the exotic class item, so we can kind of combine and maybe get an upgrade to this exotic. And looking at the best ones you could combine with Synthoceps in the left, you could go with Assassin to become invisible after getting a power melee final blow. That could be really nice for harder content. Get in there, kill the champion, and get out. You could also just run Endless Light to help build back up your grenade and your melee by using both back and forth. Then every once in a while, whenever you have your barricade, obviously use that to empower both times 2. And that'll just help regen both, and that would be the way I think I would go with this build, just to help get the melee and your grapple back. You could also go with Severance to make the power melee final blows or finishers unleash a damaging explosion. That could give this a little bit better AoE accler, which obviously always helps. And overall, I think those are the three I'd be looking for myself. I haven't farmed out on Titan yet. I should be doing that in the next few days, but I'm definitely most curious about Inmost and Severance. So now comparing all the damage of Synthoceps to the new exotic Wishful Ignorance, and what these do is gain an additional Frenzied Blade charge. Frenzied Blade briefly increases their damage with each strike. Pulses from your Banner of War return melee energy based on the number of allies healed. So looking at that, as we use our 4 Frenzied Blades, we'll get a stack of the buff every time, up to a max of times 3. And this buff will linger for about 2.5 seconds between uses, and the melee increases at times 1 is 1.2, at 2 it's 1.5, and at 3 it's going to be double melee damage. And unlike Synthoceps, this will fully stack with Banner of War, being the full 1.4x from Banner of War with this exotic, taking the total to, I think it was like 77,000 on the final melee. Obviously, we can also pair this with Tractor Cannon and 1-2 Punch once again. You will have to reactivate 1-2 Punch on every melee, I believe. I tried to do double melees and it wasn't working. Maybe I need more handling, I'm not sure. But looking at the total damage from each melee with each stack of the buff, at times 3, it went up to 199,000. And one thing about using these gauntlets is you're going to be missing out a lot of damage for your grapple melee. It can do way less than with Synthoceps. So if we compare the damage of Syntho to Wishful, the highest melee damage of both was 217, and with Wishful 199, the Syntho being roughly 9% more. But then if we compare the first melee, Syntho obviously is still going to be 217, but the Wishful's first melee was 99,000. So over the first melee, Syntho is 118% better. Then after 2 melees, Syntho gets doubled to 434, while Wishful goes up to 219, which is making a slight comeback at only 98% more. After 3 melees, the max you can do with Synthos before you run out of charges is 652,000, while Wishful climbs up a little bit higher at 369, now only 77% behind. And after 4 melees, Synthos stays the same because you don't have 4 melees, but with the 4th melee of Wishful, goes up to 569,000, which Syntho is still 15% more damage with 1 less melee than the entire 4 uses of Wishful. So not looking great for this new exotic in terms of just raw damage output. It's not better for total damage. It's not better after any single amount of melees. And up until this point, I haven't talked about the second melee, the Storm. And the reason I haven't talked about these yet is because, one, they're just not going to be as good for pure damage output or Strand Titan. The second reason is they're even worse off than the Frenzy Blade. Not only is still capped at ×3, but the ×3 is only a 1.36 on this melee compared to the full 2 on Frenzy Blade, making the comparison to Synthoceps even worse. Synthoceps are just way better for this melee compared to the new exotic, with Banner War doing over 25,000 per initial impact. The only saving grace is going to be the increased return rate of your melee. The way this works is every single time the Banner of War pulses and heals, you're going to get roughly 10% of your melee back based on the amount of people being healed, including you. And with Banner War, the higher the stack of Banner War, so ×1, ×2, ×3, ×4, it's going to tick faster and faster. So with ×4, it's going to be proccing and healing very, very rapidly. And for every ally, including you, it's going to be roughly 10% of your melee back. So while playing solo, it's going to pulse and give you 10%-ish back. But if you have one ally nearby, it's going to go up to 20. If you have two, it's going to go up to 30. And with ×4 Banner War and at least like 1 or 2 allies nearby, you're going to be getting your melees back incredibly fast. And you could put on a Pugilist primary using something like the Breachlight to help get your melee back even faster. This season, we also have Shield Crush from the Artifact, which will make it so we recharge our melee faster and get 25% more melee damage while having Woven Mail. And with this build with Into the Fray, you will always have Woven Mail on this build, constantly get that increased melee recharge rate and the 25% more melee damage, taking the Syntho Frenzy Blade damage to 271,000. You can just add 25% more to all numbers previously shown in this video. So overall, with these exotics, you're definitely never going to be lacking melee charges. You might actually have too many melee charges where you don't even know what to do with them. There's going to be meleeing like red bars just to get rid of them. You get it back very, very quickly, comboed with Into the Fray, and if you throw in a Pugilist primary, I mean, you just get them so fast. But overall, does that make up for the incredibly lack of damage from this exotic compared to the Synthoceps? Honestly, in my opinion, definitely not. The whole point of Strand Titan is just to like output a lot of damage from your melees and like 1-hit or 2-hit champions and move on. While with this, even on light in the lowest difficulty of the Nightfall, at best, it's going to take 2 melees to kill the champion, while with the Synthoceps, they're easily going to be 1 hit. And it's not like you don't get your melee back that fast without these gauntlets on. I'm using Pugilist, Breachlight, and with Into the Fray, you're going to be getting your melee back still very fast, and you're still going to have at least 1, if not 2 charges for every champion you run into. You might not have the excess that you do with the Wishful Exotic, but you're still going to have enough. I think the balancing on Wishful is just really, really bad, and I'm not sure how or why they ship them in this state. I think the balancing is pretty straightforward of how to make it work correctly, because right now, with the max buff of ×3, the melee damage is still lower than that of the Synthoceps, even though they nerf Banner War interaction with the Synthoceps, and this is still the 1.4x. There's absolutely no reason why the max damage of the ×3 melee, where you have to hit 3 melees first, and it only applies to your 4th one, isn't higher single damage than any single Synthoceps melee. There's just absolutely no reason that should be the case. For these gauntlets to be worth using, the final melee with the full buff has to be doing more damage in a single melee than Synthoceps. And if you combine the total damage of all 4 melees and compare it to the 3 melees of the Synthoceps, it also needs to be higher. And I think the crossover point should be after 3 melees. I think Synthoceps should be better for the 1st and 2nd melee. Then after 3 melees with both, the total damage should be kind of getting close. Then at 4 melees, these have to just be straight up better in terms of total damage and the single last melee damage. And if that was the case, I would 100% recommend using these. But right now, it just loses in every single category except for just simply getting your melee back faster, to the point where your first melee with Synthoceps is going to be more damage than the first 2 of this exotic. So right now, I would not recommend running the new Wishful Exotic, but as a whole, Strand Titan is absolutely still perfectly fine. Is it as good as Prismatic Hunter? No, but I think comparing stuff to Prismatic Hunter is just kind of unfair. It is easily one of the best subclasses of all time, and even though Strand Titan isn't as good as it, it's still among the best in the game. Anyways, I think that's be it for the video. Like usual, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.